The Marketing Mixtape, a space where we cut through the noise and focus on what matters in marketing. Grab your coffee and enjoy. Okay, so welcome back to another episode of Yugo Media's The Marketing Mixtape, the podcast. This brings us to a super interesting subject, which is split testing. Last time we talked all about targeting, selecting your audiences. This time we're talking about split testing. I'm joined again by Jason. Hey, Jason.
Hey, Bruce. Thanks. Pleased to be back.
Nice. So we're going to be covering kind of 4 or 5 main topics today, hoping to kind of go over these at a high level, and then we're going to dive into some of them at a more deeper level as well. So we're going to start off by talking about building a solid foundation. Then we're going to kind of look at the different flavors of split testing. So classic A/B testing, multivariate testing. We're going to be looking at some landing page optimization and testing too. We're going to be talking about looking into results, extracting kind of insights and optimizing based on those. And then we're going to take a look at some, I know, Jason, you have some stories to share with us. So we're going to be looking at some actual results from some of the campaigns that we've run, talk about those, share some insights, and then we'll
Awesome.
Nice. So building a solid foundation, as with anything, if we don't have the groundwork set, the foundations built solidly, anything we build on top of that is going to be shaky. So when it comes to PPC and building ad campaigns, what are kind of the basics that we need to have in place, Jason, to make sure that any testing that we run is going to have a statistical significance and will actually mean something at the end of the day?
Yeah, I mean, well, obviously, when you consider taking on testing as an exercise in your paid media, which should be, there is multiple decisions that you have to make when you approach this exercise, this evolution that you have in your campaigns. The first is frequency, which is really important to know when to test at what time. Second is minimum data. So like there is a certain amount of minimum data you need for split testing to work. And I think the third is impact. So you have to be able to quantify if a test is going to reveal sufficient data for you to make a conclusion and draw a conclusion that you can then tangibly or practically apply to the campaigns. And basically, there's no point testing something that's already performing at industry averages or above industry averages. Now, I'm not saying you should sleep on your data and on, rest in your laurels, but if something is not broken, don't go and break it.
Makes sense. And it's about taking that risk, because what works today is not necessarily going to work tomorrow. Yeah. But what worked yesterday may work tomorrow. So it's all about testing at the end of the day. And I think that's part of the kind of the art of marketing. There's a lot of science behind it, but then the art as well, knowing what to test and just keep evolving. It's kind of the survival of the fittest around here at the moment in the marketing world. So I know you kind of talked about some of the minimum data levels that we need for results to have a statistical significance. And then we're going to kind of dig into that deeper as well. But even just before we start running a test, kind of, what do we need to think about as far as ad account structure, ad groups? That all needs to be set up, organized, correct, before we even kind of start tweaking.
Exactly. So we talked about just before talking about maybe decisions you need to make when approaching split testing, as in just strategic decisions, right? What's the minimum amount of data you're going to need? What's the frequency? When are you going to test? And what are you going to test? What parts of your campaigns or of your funnel are you going to be working with? So account structure plays a very important role. Why? Because organization in your account will allow you to realize where some of the areas are to improve. If everything is very disorganized, and there are lone campaigns out there. I mean, we have sometimes campaigns that have one ad group and a couple of keywords. That does happen, but generally speaking, if you have an organized account where you have cascading ad groups, a set amount of ad groups that are doing different, articulating different campaigns within, you might say, your structure, then it's going to allow you to find areas that you can zoom into and split test. Now, if you don't have an organized account or your account structure is a mess, it's going to be very difficult to know, what campaigns or what areas of the campaigns do you want to start working on, and B, what the impact is going to be, so you can do an analysis like 2 weeks from now, or 7 day over versus 7 days versus the previous 7 days, and say, hey, I made an improvement in my click-through rate. I made an improvement on my average 1,000 cost per click, or I made an improvement on the on-page conversions. Like, if you don't have the organization in the account, you can't expect to see the results at the end of the day when you finish your split test and want to say, hey, this was an improvement, we've learned this, and we can move on.
Perfect. And again, coming back to testing significance, I mean, again, we're going to come back to that, but there are tests we can run beforehand to understand whether a test we're planning on running is going to have is going to hold significance. And then obviously we can test afterwards to see if the final results do have significance. So what can we test? Obviously we've got ad copy,
big question,
landing pages. Yeah, the big question for sure. We've got some kind of, pretty obvious standouts like ad copy, ad headlines, ad descriptions, landing pages, but then kind of on the back end, what's not customer facing, we could say, as far as bids, targeting, testing audiences. Anything else, Jason, you would recommend testing? Again, this is going to depend on kind of any previous work we've done, any previous testing as far as prioritizing areas for testing. But I'd love to hear your insights.
Well, I mean, how granular you want to go is a decision you need to make, bearing in mind the opportunity or the tangible ROI you could achieve by learning from the split test, right? So how granular you want to go is a strategic decision about how much you can potentially save or grow or improve from that split test. So some things probably not worth split testing, some things are. So you have to make those decisions on the run as you're working through your account structure and what you want to test. And testing is ultimately an exercise that you want to do in a frequency that you have organized into your campaign management. So just to start with, there are certain areas in your campaign that you want to test at a given time, and there's others you won't want to test at the given time. For example, ad schedule. Ad schedule is a huge split test because where you put your budget at a given time of the day can define if the auction is selling clicks at its highest or at its lowest. It can also define if your customers are in the best mindset or the right intent to convert. It's not the same if you're running ads and you're spending your thousands of or hundreds of advertising budget at night trying to convert teenagers to buy sneakers, or you're trying to convert somebody into signing up for an education. So when you do a test, you need to bear in mind everything starts from the audience you are trying to influence, and it starts from the bottom up, not from the top down. What does that mean? It starts from the ad backwards and not from the top of the account structure downwards. And I've tried both, I've tested both, and from my experience, the things that you tweak at the top have the least impact in the short term, the long impact in the long term, making it very hard to conclude if a split test has positive ROI. For example, if I change a bidding strategy, which is a huge change on a campaign, it will have immediate effect on the campaign. Okay, like one day to the next, you'll see a change, and things will start to happen. But when you can make a decision as to whether that was a positive change or not, it's going to be a very long time. You're going to need a lot of data to be able to make that conclusion. Whereas if I change, for example, the creative of an ad, very quickly, there's very little variables for the campaigns to disrupt for you to be able to say, hey, that change in ad creative really improved my click-through rates and also my on-page conversion rate. So certainly that new ad creative is better than the previous ad creative, and everything else in the campaign remains the same. So as you work through your split testing, the rule of thumb for me is, again, based on personal preference, and I believe there are lots of different ways out there to do this, is be very specific about the frequency of when you do your split tests, and B, work from the bottom up, because that is going to allow you to change things that have less down campaign effect. So like downstream. So if you change something at the top, it's going to change everything underneath it. That means if you change something under the campaign structure, that something above it has already changed, it's going to disrupt the potential outcome of that change. So the best way is to change siloed activities that you can monitor on their own, and they don't have a cascading effect on the rest of the account or the campaign. Does that make sense?
Gotcha. It does. And so just coming back to frequency, when you talk about test frequency, you mean the amount of times we run a test?
Frequency means two things: the amount of changes you make on a campaign and when you make the changes. So frequency. Perfect. So frequency can kind of is two things. It's basically the volume of changes you make on a campaign and how often you make changes on that campaign. So, for example, we have an online university as a client, right? One of our clients is like an online university, and their education program, which they sell online, we can change an ad that invites people to join the education program, right? For example, we can change the ad. Let's just say we change it today. And if I have 7 days of analysis of data for me to look and say, hey, this ad has done better, but let's say the following 7 days is the long weekend of Thanksgiving. Now, the previous 7 days running up to that with the previous ad creative selling this program is going to be very different to the days over the long weekend of Thanksgiving. So how am I going to be able to make an informed decision about the ad creative being better than the previous? So that is why frequency is very important. What we use is we try to find times in the week or in the month that have the least external push and pull factors on the bidding campaigns, on the bidding of the campaigns, and also on the market. And then the second thing is to make sure that you do it in the same allotted time. So if you're going to take 7 days, take it Monday to Monday or Monday to Saturday or Monday to Wednesday, and then apply that to the next test. And make sure that the dates that you're doing it have the least external factors that could influence the campaign as possible. Now, regarding the volume of times you will make changes, we would recommend doing one change at a time. And you can make as many changes on an account as you want or as you see fit. But ultimately, if you think of a minimum of 7 days to optimize and to test, and you've probably got around 46 things, I think it's 46 or 48 configurations that you can make on one campaign in a split test. If you do 48 times 7, I mean, you're basically 3/4 of the way through the year. So I wouldn't recommend making multiple changes at once. I'd recommend making one change, maybe a couple of changes a month, maybe 2 or 3 changes to a campaign a month, unless it's like radically necessary and there's negative ROAS or negative ROI. That's a different case. But if the campaign is performing and you want to make changes to improve it and optimize it, a handful of changes a month is okay, but make sure to separate them so they don't overlap.
So knowing when to cut the test short, I guess is what you're saying, with being on the lookout for negative impact, I guess is important consideration for sure. Yep. And talking about testing multiple variables versus just classical A/B testing, I bring us to our next subject, which is test types. But before that, I think kind of a last thing to mention before we move out of this kind of building a solid foundation is tracking. Getting all our tracking codes set up. Make sure that we have a really solid foundation on that level. It's crazy. I mean, Jason, we've seen this, the amount of people that we talk to that don't have a remarketing pixel set up, regardless of whether you're planning on investing in remarketing campaigns in the short term or not. But building that data and building those audiences is an essential for anyone that's got a website and is receiving visitors to that website.